Hi, hallo, welkom allemaal. Fijn dat jullie er zijn met veel meer dan ze hadden ingeschreven. Yay, dat is nog eens een leuke opsteker. I'll start off in English this evening because our speaker who is calling in from Mexico is already on the line with us, so this way she can also follow me. I wish you a very warm welcome to PAF, the Platform for Architectuur en Feminisme, but also on behalf of MINO Art Space, where we are this evening, and of Endeavour, because they're collaborating with us to organize this evening. My name is Evelien Pieters, and tonight we'll continue our conversation series on building a feminist architectural practice, and we're collecting building blocks towards a more inclusive architecture sector. As said, the evening will consist of two parts. First, we'll have a lecture by Adeola Enigbokan. She's calling in, so you'll see her appearing on the screen in a little bit. And after her lecture, we have time for Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, we'll have enough time to have a conversation with her on that. And then we'll say goodbye to her, and we'll continue the conversation in the room here with two guests, Ama Koranteng-Kumi and Caroline Thaler, and then we'll switch to Dutch. So hopefully that's also okay for everybody. And then you're very welcome to also join in our conversation. We'll also open it up to all of you. So let's see where we will end up, and I will try to conclude around 10 this evening. So we're very pleased to have with us Adeola Enigbokan, to digitally welcome her. I hope we'll see. Hi, there she is. Hi, Adeola. So I'm also talking that way because there's the camera, and if we look at there, she can actually see us. So yeah, the first row, or you just saw it, is also in the camera, so you can wave at her. And if you want to ask a question later on, it would also be nice if you can come here, and then Adeola can also see you. But we'll do that after the lecture, of course. On the 27th of November, we had an evening on architecture culture, and our speaker was Setare Norani. And in one of her comments, she mentioned the shadow client, and she mentioned Adeola as that it was a concept by Adeola. And I'm so very happy that now tonight Adeola is with us herself to speak more on this concept, because it was really intriguing to us this evening, so we're very happy to talk on it more tonight. Adeola is an environmental psychologist. She advises and coaches design leaders on ethical practice in the design of urban spaces, future work, and emergent technologies. She's also committed to transforming design workplace cultures by supporting a new generation of more engaged, more aware, and more ethical design leaders. And she does that by teaching, and she currently teaches social design at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. And previously, she has taught architecture at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, and science and technology studies at New York University. She holds a doctorate in psychology from the City University of New York and a bachelor in anthropology from Columbia University. And as said, tonight, Adeola will speak to us about the concept of the shadow client. Adeola, the floor digitally then is yours.
Okay, hi, hello. I'm just gonna start by sharing my screen so you can follow along with me. All right. Okay, so thank you for having me and for the lovely introduction, Evelien. So I am Adeola Enigbokan, and I'm here because Evelien asked me to come and talk to you about the shadow client today. I guess the real question of the evening is about participation and inclusion, and what I'm going to try to do in this talk is link participatory design and the shadow client to some of the topics that are important to you all as as architects or people interested in architecture and the future of the discipline and of the practice itself. especially as regards participatory design. So basically, for me, the complexity of the work that I do, and the complexity of the work I think we all do whenever we're designing space that other people are going to use, forces us to think about big systems, about the interaction of big systems, and that when we are working to create space, we have to kind of take into account all the ways in which, as architects or as spatial designers, that large systems interact with other large systems, that there might be many participants in a participatory design process that we can't initially anticipate, that there might be many participants that are beyond our ability to immediately see them. And I know that in architectural training, in typical architectural training, participatory design in general is not necessarily highlighted in typical architectural training. It's something that architects come along if they do big public projects or if they start to work on big competitions or requests. So basically, for me, the shadow client came about from working with architects on large design projects and thinking that there was something in this process and in this approach that we were missing. So today, I guess, one of the major things that I think is relevant to you all in PAF is this notion of how architecture could be more feminist or could become feminist, especially when what we're dealing with is a discipline that sort of designs for the default male. It's a kind of a masculine discipline. So that's another thing that the shadow client has helped me to understand, that the concept of architecture itself, the way we do it, has a default masculinity built in, both on the side of the designer and on the side of the client and the user. So I'm going to get more into that as we go along, but more or less that's what this is going to be about. Those are the sort of the broad overview of the topics that I'm going to cover. To start off, I just would like everyone to take a moment to note kind of my honor agreement. Basically, it's very important to me that we respect and honor the intellectual labor of others. I try to give reference to the ideas and how I get the ideas that I'm speaking with you about today. But I also hope that you also do the same in terms of sharing ideas. I'm very glad that Setari shared with you where the concept of the shadow client for her came about. And so hopefully, in terms of sharing these ideas that you learned from me further, please take note of where they come. And if you want to share, ask. If you're not sure, please ask, and please attribute everything wherever possible. I think proper attribution is a very feminist practice. So we can start there. And hopefully, show of hands, we all sort of agree to this, right? Awesome, thank you. Great. I love audience participation from a distance. So I also want to start by giving an acknowledgement of the land that I'm on and that I'm speaking to you from, right? So when I look out of the window in that direction that you can't see, that's what I see. I see El Popocatépetl. And Popocatépetl is one of Mexico's active volcanoes. It is it has a great history, a great mythology. This is the home. It is kind of one of the gods of the lands of the Olmecas, the Toltecas, and the Mexicas, who are the ancestors that lived on this land before I arrived. And so I just want to point out that this is not just a mountain, this is a volcano. It is a living thing. It's been active since long before you or I or even humanity existed, and it's probably going to be active long after it existed. It might be one of the reasons that some of us stop existing very soon, because it's currently smoking today. So if you hear any sort of coughing in my voice, I have my water here. It's because El Popo, as Mexicans call him, is active and contributing to this conversation right now. And I say all this to say that we also have to take into account the land that we work with as architects. Land is not just dead. We don't just build on it. It's actually alive. It's a subject. It's an active player in the world. And this particular volcano, El Popo, is also a taker of land, right? Whenever he decides to erupt, architecture disappears. It's done. It's gone. He takes land and also creates new land. And I think that's also something very important. So I would say, in reality, he's my only client. And I serve at his pleasure. Just wanted to say that to open up. So speaking of which, architecture usually does serve the most powerful. Sometimes they get it wrong about who's most powerful, but architecture usually serves the most powerful. So what does it mean to design for what is not visible in the design process, right? So if architecture serves a client that is, the client that has the money, the client that has the power, the client that has the authority, then what is not visible in that exchange, in that process, in that service, and how do we deal with it? And that's the question that brings about, for me, the shadow client. So when I think about the shadow client, I think the most simple way for you to think about it is that it's a tool. So what I'm offering you today in the shadow client is a tool. It's a device, a design device, which can expand your role as a designer. And it kind of asks you to take into account all the stakeholders, human and non-human, who are not officially at the table in the design process. So I'm asking you to think about the constituents that we don't normally imagine, who might be part of the design process. For example, the big volcano could be a shadow client, depending on, if someone wants, is looking to, build a resort nearby. You have to think about the volcano as potentially one of the clients of this design. So the shadow client is also a way to go beyond the brief that you've been given. Because in every brief, especially when it's dealing with a complex design that is going to be utilized by many, many different types of constituencies, the more complex the design, the more difficult it is to encompass within one brief. And often people who are writing the brief get the brief wrong. So the shadow client is a way of expanding the brief, expanding the role of the designer, and also a way to help the work reach its full potential, right? To anticipate, to try to imagine and anticipate who your work might touch and how far your work could go. So think of the shadow client first and foremost as, for you, as a tool, as a shorthand to expand your brief and your role. So I'm going to give you several examples today of working with the shadow client. So I'm going to start by talking about this project, Coltsville. So Coltsville was a project, the Coltsville project, which is located in Hartford, Connecticut, which is a city in Connecticut, which is not so far. It's a couple of hours from New York City driving. So Coltsville was a prototype of a new typology of U.S. national park. So you've probably heard of Yellowstone. You've probably heard of Rushmore. You've heard of maybe you've heard of big national parks. The U.S. is famous for having very big areas that, since the early part of the 20th century, the late 19th, early 20th century, these are areas that have been set aside for preservation, for conservation of the sort of natural landscape, the flora and fauna of the United States. And most of those parks, or just almost all of those parks, exist in the Western United States. So everything, I guess, past the Rocky Mountains, right? And so we're talking about California, Washington State, Oregon, New Mexico, Utah, so the big Western states. And the reason that the national parks are there is because the settler colonialism of the United States started on the east, because that's the direction you all came um, from Europe, came in that direction towards the eastern United States, or what would be the eastern states, and set up the first colonies there. And so on that side of the United States, a lot of those natural landscapes, and of course, the peoples of those natural landscapes, the indigenous peoples who lived in those landscapes, were destroyed, basically. So as the westward expansion continued, they decided to take over these Western states and make the conservation there. So conservation is a very fraught and also violent process that also involved displacing a lot of indigenous people. But basically, the Coltsville project came about because people on the eastern side of the United States started saying, hey, how come we don't have national parks on our side? We would like national parks. We would like things that celebrate our landscapes. Well, those landscapes are full of architecture and built environment. So this was going to be a new typology of national park that would conserve the memory of cities, of industries that were relevant to the building of the U.S. national body, or the U.S. sense of itself. So a team was put together, an interdisciplinary team was put together, right? Which was to think about the future of these parks. And Coltsville, this location in Connecticut, would be the first, I guess, test case, the first prototype. And it would be, they wanted a new spatial identity. They wanted also a visual identity for thinking about these parks. And they would use them in developing this typology in several other locations in the eastern part of the United States. So they put together an interdisciplinary team that had about 2 or 3 architects, well, 2 architects and 1 urban planner and designer. And I think that's probably 1 too many architects. Myself, an environmental psychologist. They put together an urban historian and a graphic designer, a designer. And so we were to put together we put together a pitch for this work, and we won the work. And the idea here is, almost as soon as we started working, the shadow client, well, this is actually, I tell this story because this is where the shadow client first became a concept for me. I first named it on this project. So what happened on this project was that it was just so complex. We had so many things to think about, not least of which was the meaning of the place, Coltsville itself. I think it's super important to identify the shadow client during the beginning phases of the work, and I'll tell you what I mean. So what was Coltsville? Well, Coltsville was the home of the Colt 45. This was the factory of Samuel Colt, the inventor of the firearm, this firearm that you see on your screen, that was called the weapon that won the West. It was used heavily by settlers and by U.S. military, the U.S. military and settlers in the settlement and the expansion into the Western United States. So when they say it was the weapon that won the West, what they're referring to essentially is what we will call genocide today, in the sense that it was about clearing the West of people and animals and whatever would stand in the way of the development of the United States into a place that was safe for the white settlers of European descent who wanted to be there and take over those lands and subdue those lands. So to say a little bit more, that same Colt 45 weapon, which became very famous, it's the weapon when you see the cowboys in the movies, like kind of flip it and they're like shooting and they have them in their holsters. That's the weapon. That's the classic weapon. That weapon manufacturer later went on to manufacture the M16. The M16 became the standard service rifle for the US military in 1969 during the Vietnam War. It later went on to be the most produced firearm of its caliber. And currently, it's used by about 15 NATO countries and about 80 countries worldwide. So this weapon and its factory was, which you saw in the earlier image, that was the factory where the weapon was manufactured in Connecticut, became the weapon of choice for these kinds of, for military action. And it became a symbol of one of the great things that the US is known for. Some might say weapons dealing, others would say manufacturing and industry, innovation. So they chose this park because it had great significance to the town. They chose this factory to become the beginning of this new typology of urban park because they wanted to highlight this notion of innovation. There were about 40 stakeholders in the process of thinking about what this park would be, representing national interests, state interests, the city, the neighborhood organizations in the neighborhood around this old factory, and the businesses that serve those neighborhoods and that serve the city. All of these 40 different stakeholders representing different entities had to be sort of spoken with and dealt with in the development of this concept of the park. And what was at stake was the memory of this place. What did this place mean? Who was going to remember it? How was it going to be remembered? So another point about the shadow client is that it first surfaces as a funny feeling. What do I mean? So for me, as I was looking at the initial stakeholders list that we were given, I thought there's something missing. There's something missing. When we, the design team, initially visited the site and walked around and drove around, what we found in the neighborhood were many we found many, I would call them little shrines or little altars. You know, when you put flowers and teddy bears and things on the side of the road because someone was, hit by, like a cyclist was hit by a car there to remember someone. Well, there were a lot of those. And when we looked closer, we realized that those little memory altars located all around the neighborhood were places where people were shot. People were killed by gun violence around that neighborhood. And when I went home, I researched it, and I found out that there was an organization in that neighborhood that was composed of women, and it was called Mothers Against Gun Violence. And they were the ones who were creating those little memorials all around the neighborhood. But when I looked at the list of stakeholders for discussing the park, well, there was no one from that group. That group was not as part of the stakeholders. And so I started thinking, wasn't it strange that there was going to be a park commemorating the history of this most famous gun, but nobody was going to ask the women who had lost many children and who were trying to remember their children lost to gun violence all around and who lived all around this neighborhood. So me and the urban historian who were on the team, who was also an urban designer, started looking into the history of the weapon itself, the history of what the weapon was, what it actually had done, where in the world it had existed, what kind of specific sorts of violence were associated with that specific weapon. And we started putting together a new profile. And then we started to reach out and communicate with the Mothers Against Gun Violence group in the neighborhood and visit with them, speak with them, and try to understand what their feelings were about the history of this factory, that this now defunct factory that was, you know, the remains of which were going to be turned into a park in their neighborhood, which they didn't actually know at the time. And then we began the process of trying to get them included in the list of stakeholders who would be able to attend the meetings and give feedback and, you know, share with the visioning of the park. So all of this process started as a funny feeling. Part of why it was difficult, part of why it was a feeling under the surface that was difficult to surface, it was under the surface and it was difficult to bring up because there were some people on the team who didn't think that was particularly relevant or important to the work of the spatial design, right? And I hate to say it, but the architects on the team were not particularly initially oriented towards those particular groups and these particular feelings. They weren't sure if it was relevant to the design, right, to the spatial design. So what I and the urban historian had to do was start to navigate those disciplinary differences in order to basically argue and put forward across these disciplinary boundaries what it was that we thought was important in this work, right? There was a hierarchy that had surfaced between the masculine side of the design work and what were the feminine side, or you could call them the hard or the soft concerns, right? Funny feelings can also come not just from the designers on the team, but also from stakeholders. As we started to talk to more people, we discovered that there were more people who needed to be included in this process, including the union of laborers who had worked in those factories, actually, the labor union that had worked in those factories before it was closed. We also thought it was important to bring forward the mothers. So all of those different constituents brought up also funny feelings about the work. And I call them funny feelings because they're kind of these hard to point out, but it's something is not quite right in the way that we're approaching this design. It's that kind of feeling. No one person should hold those feelings alone. And that's also why it's good to have diverse teams, because every single person on that team, based on their background, based on their disciplinary history, is going to have a different kind of, might be able to sense something different about the work. Funny feelings aren't bad. So it often starts with a funny feeling, surface those feelings at the beginning. So here's one of the members of that group, of one of these older women, the Mothers Against Gun Violence groups. And here's me working because they were brought to the table. And then I was put in charge of their table because none of the architects wanted to deal directly with like older ladies who talk too much, right? So I was on that particular table to try to kind of gather their knowledge of the neighborhood. I was really happy to be on that table because those were the people of all the different kinds of stakeholders, businesses. Those were the people in the room that I felt had the most information about the history of the neighborhood. They were the people who had lived there the most consistently. They were the people whose family members had lived and died and been killed in those neighborhoods. They walked with their dogs every day all around. They put the memorials around. They knew a lot, right? So they, for me, became one of the most important shadow clients of the work, right? So they came up for me out of the shadows. They were people for whom this park and this work would be extremely important, but also people who did not have people who did not have the voice, right, in the process at the beginning. So that shadow client became this catalyst for an even more profound work than the work that I thought that I was supposed to do at the beginning. Eventually, that talking with them led me to propose a new workshop, to propose an additional part of the research work, of the design research that had not been considered. And this was the object stories workshop. So it was just a small day. I don't want to talk too much about this technique, but it was it's for me, it arises out of my environmental psychology practice. But it was like, imagine it like a small exhibition in which everyone was asked to bring objects that were important to them and that were relevant to their life or their work in the neighborhood. And to create little exhibit text explaining what those objects were, and to kind of circulate and make comments about each other's objects and start to surface from that what was most important to people about this space, about the memory of this factory, and what was most important to each constituent in terms of what they wanted to see as part of the identity of this park. So these are some examples, right? So one constituent or one stakeholder of Native American descent brought some artwork or some craft work from their own tribal backgrounds to connect with the lost Native American heritage of this particular city and site, and to connect with the history of the Code 45 and the clearing of the West that they wanted to see addressed in this new typology of park. Someone else who was a former strike worker, who was a former worker at the original factory, brought this T-shirts, which they used to wear because the United Auto Workers had one of the longest strikes in US history just before this factory closed between 1984 and 1986. They had a long, difficult fight when the laborers walked out and went on strike. So he brought and wanted to talk about that. And he wanted their labor history remembered in the memory of this site. So basically, you also want to let the shadow client help you to determine the deliverables, right? So rather than deliver a whole new identity, which is what they wanted in the time given, we actually delivered a process and a technique based on all of the new sort of shadow clients that were surfaced. We delivered a process and a technique for developing the park as a communication between various stakeholders, as an expanded conversation. So we started with this report, right? If you're interested in the full project report, you can send me a message and I'm happy to send you. There are several reports in this talk, and you can hit me up with a message, an email, and I will get back to you and send you a copy if you're interested in. So this included kind of like an architectural survey of the area, but it also included these new sections that had to do with the history of education, with the infrastructure of the area, with what innovation actually had meant there, recreation, the neighborhood identity, the perceptions of violence and gun safety, which was never part of the initial brief. So these were all areas that we felt needed to be further researched and considered before decisions were made about the identity. And we provided in this kit, in this report, we also provided a toolkit for developing an identity by developing further conversations to help our real clients, our official clients, which was the US National Park Service and its officers and its park rangers, to connect better with the local community, which they were not used to doing because they had worked primarily in the kind of big national parks in the West. And they had just moved into this new area. So they did not understand how to make participatory conversations and negotiations with an urban neighborhood, right? So this turned out to be how we could best help our client, the Park Service, deal with this problem going forward. So what do we need to unlearn? So what the shadow client basically then led me, discovering the shadow client then led me to understand that something is off in architecture education. We need to learn new things or unlearn old things about the way we practice architecture. In about 2019, a book came out called Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. You may be familiar with this book by Caroline Criado Perez. But basically what the book does is a very comprehensive overview of the research into how things are designed. And basically she establishes very clearly that most things that we use, from seatbelts to bathrooms to whatever, are designed first with a default male in mind. It's just a default male user. And a lot of the standards from medical equipment to whatever you can think of, the standards that are of what is supposed to give us safety, comfort, what is supposed to enhance our experience of things, spaces, whatever, is based on the experience of a man, a generic man. And that particular gender bias pervades all of the research. So I would highly recommend this book just to get clear about some of the examples and get clear about how that happens. So it made me think that there are a lot of things that we need to unlearn in design practices for a variety of different products that we create. So I developed this concept called the Center for the Advancement of Masculine Practices, or architecture camp. And the idea is that it would be an experiment and kind of almost like a humorous experiment in radical architectural de-education. So architecture for me became very clear that it's not a neutral discipline for just constructing environments, but actually a practice of performative masculinity. And that practice itself requires deconstructing. We have to develop new ways of doing architecture from the design workplace to the built environment. And that's what camp was set up to do. And our very first inaugural event happened in Rotterdam, appropriately, at Het Nieuwe Institute. And, you know, we kind of we turned the one floor of the Institute into the Center for the Advancement of Masculine Practices, and communicated with a lot of architects, a lot of young architects who came, and designers who wanted to learn more about these masculine practices. And these next pages are excerpts from that report. If you're also interested to learn more about the foundation, because this was our inaugural event, if you're interested to learn more about the foundation of camp, you can also message me about that. But basically, we were starting from the premise again of masculine values, how they impact urban design, how they impact participatory design, how they've impacted Rotterdam itself. And we brought together, again, an interdisciplinary group of social scientists, working architects, senior designers, associates at Amsterdam and Rotterdam firms, and design directors. So we brought together several levels of the design disciplines to talk about and propose new ways of thinking through the future of design from that perspective. One of our presenters, Maranthi, was a senior architect or design director at UN Studio, and she spoke about the work that they had done and the context of working on a team for the design of a new railway system, urban railway system in Qatar, and how complicated that was, and how much, and you can just see the representation of the space, and it comes across as a very masculine space just from looking at the way. But they were dealing in their design with the local sort of customs and attitudes about gender and sexuality in the way that they were designing it, and they had to deal with those as part of the parameters of the design of this urban transportation system. right? So it also affected the composition of their team. It affected the comfort of non-heterosexual members of their team. It affected the comfort of women of their team. There were a variety of things that they had to navigate in order to do this work that kind of remained, again, below the surface, and that never really surfaced fully as the shadow client. So these were some of the participants in the panel part of the event. And we were really talking about what do changing gender roles and practices mean for the design workplace and the built environment, because you can't think about one without the other. If we don't transform the design workplace itself, then we're not going to be able to transform the built environment. So when we're working on participatory design, we have to think about the composition of our teams. We have to think about the approaches that we're taking. We have to create a space within the team, the design team itself, for dealing with complex issues, right? So we have to have diverse teams, and we have to have teams that are able to tackle difficult questions, or we're not going to be able to bring that complexity into the design of the built environment. It's going to just be the same things over and over, right? So participatory design starts first with you, with your team. So we also did a co-design session. So this was participatory design with architects and designers, right? And we were really thinking about the future of work. We were thinking about what we can do or learn to bring about the futures in design that we want, given these inherent biases in the discipline itself. So that was a really intense and cool session. You'll recognize Satare in these pictures. That's where she heard about it first. So that resulted in a list of things that people wanted to learn that started to inform my own practice and started to inform both my educational practice and my practice working on design teams. So the last story I want to tell, so that we have time for questions, is what happens when architects themselves become the shadow clients. So this was a piece of recent work that I did. I was contacted by a major architectural and design firm. So before I get into that, I just wanted to say that what that firm wanted to do was basically, or what they needed to do, was redefine what they felt was excellent architectural design work, right? But redefining excellence is a difficult thing to do when you have been successful for a long time as an architect who has worked in the masculine practice for a long time, who is used, and you think to yourself, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So let's just keep going on in the way that we're doing. Why do we have to just redefine what we think is excellent? But something that I've learned from working with the shadow clients in my own work and life is that it usually forces you first to take an internal look at what you think is good, what you think is excellent, what you think your role is as a designer, what you think you have to deliver. And it makes you ask, do I or does my team actually have the competence to meet the demands of this shadow client or of the client as a whole? Are there aspects of my own team's culture that need to change? And how can I redefine excellence, and what would good design mean in the context of this particular project? So in this case, my client was a multinational architecture and engineering firm. It was a European country branch, headquarters, well, not headquarters, but one of the branches of this firm. I was working directly with the 7-person leadership of the firm, and the staff of that office was about 250 people, encompassing engineering, architecture, sales, and administration. And the brief that they had given me was that they needed to connect the goals of their new 3-year strategic plan with the need that they had identified for internal cultural change. Basically, they were losing work. They were applying for big public projects that were necessarily participatory projects, right? So they wanted to redesign, I don't know, train services. They wanted to redesign train stations. They wanted to build like new palaces of justice or centers, of justice, things that were, or municipality offices. They were applying for big work in major Western European centers. And they kept running into problems. They would get to maybe the final three firms and teams, and they would start getting these questions from the city or from the client that was asking specifically about the composition of their team, if they had local connections, local talent, if they had culturally diverse teams. And they kept failing in the final stages of winning the work. So they reached out to me because they understand that something needed to change because what they were thinking was an excellent, experienced architectural team was not matching what their potential clients were thinking. So so basically they became kind of the shadow client for me in this. The other brief was particularly two members of the leadership team had reached out to me because they had identified that in selling these projects, that was the problem, that they did not know how to understand what is an excellent team that matches their standards, but also matches the standards of their potential clients when they're going for big, public, participatory work. So those two within the team were my clients within the clients. They were also not exactly shadow clients, but they were clients within the clients. And then finally, they were trying to develop strategies for cultural change across the whole staff. So basically in this particular brief, what started to emerge is that the shadow clients would be a new kind of architect. Basically, they needed a new kind of architect that was excellent in different ways. So my intervention eventually was to help the leadership team understand and implement principles of inclusive leadership within that architectural and engineering space, and introduce quite practical, quantitative and qualitative and research-based metrics and methods to measure and facilitate cultural change, and also to connect the need to redefine the company and the team values. For example, they really felt that they were excellent. Excellence, excellence, excellence as a word kept coming up. And for them, the deep conflict was that, and I heard this a lot when I was living and working in Amsterdam as well, and in Rotterdam. People over there in y'all's part of the world have some kind of block. They think that things can be excellent or they can be diverse. You can't be excellently diverse or have a diverse kind of excellence. So they had a kind of mental and practical block, being unable to understand that you can actually have an excellent design team that achieves strategic goals, that is also diverse fundamentally. And actually, the diversity is the excellence of the team. It's partly that. So that was my intervention, to kind of work in those areas. So in conclusion, I would just say what the shadow client teaches us is to, one, allow conflict and resistance to enhance the creative brief, learn with the client, and evolve with every obstacle. I don't know how it is in Belgium, but I know that in the Dutch-speaking world, even within the language, avoiding conflict is a huge part. It's a very conflict avoidant. I had an experience of a lot of conflict avoidance, but I don't think that obstacles or conflicts are bad for design. I don't think we all have to get along. I think that we have to surface obstacles and work through conflicts to go even farther than we could without doing that. So being able to manage conflict well is a really important skill if you're going to do participatory design work and if you're going to work with shadow clients. So learn with the clients, learn through the shadow clients, and involve with every obstacle. And finally, be ready to sacrifice what you hold most dear and become excellent in a new way. Thank you. And I hope to hear from you. And I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you. My hat is spinning. Oh, could you, now I just wanted to say the last slide had your contact info on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask it
Oh, you want me
in
to
the
put it
end,
back?
but maybe in the end then, or I'll just make sure everyone
Well,
gets
I'll
it.
put it back for this first. I'll put it back for the first few minutes, okay?
Yeah. So
sorry,
I wanted to ask you this in the end, but if some of you want to write it down, then at least we have a second. Okay. Now I have to make sure I'm not in front of you, and I'm still talking to you also, and I can see the audience. Okay. I have to stand here better. Thank you so much. Oh, there's so many things we could go into. But let me first look at all of you. We have time for questions. You can go into one of the several topics Adeola talked about. Who wants to start us off? Yeah. It's a bit ongemakkelijk, uncomfortable. But if you could come here, it would be really great, because then she can see you. I might. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Hello, everyone. Hi, Adeola.
Hi. Hi.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
No, look over here. I can see you. So what's your name? Tell me your name.
So I'm Caroline. Thank you
Hi,
so
Caroline.
much for your speech or your speaking today. I had heard a bit before, and I already thought it was very useful for our practice. So I work at Endeavour. I will go into detail about that a bit later. But we work on a lot of co-creation and participation processes. So still a lot to implement, I think. Maybe one of the questions that I have is actually, you already answered it partially, so maybe it's the only answer that you have, but when I learned about the shadow client, I hear a lot of that it comes out of our blind spots. So it's the clients that you didn't see in the beginning. In order to identify these blind spots or to fill these blind spots, I was wondering what would you recommend to navigate this? I already heard the diverse team, but maybe for our own selves, are there things that we can do? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think it's really great to know. I think everyone has it now. Can I stop sharing?
Yeah. I think everyone has it now.
Great.
Thank you.
So, sure. So I thank you, Caroline, for that question. Yes, because it comes out of our blind spots, I think the most important thing is recognizing that we do have blind spots, right? So recognizing that we actually do have blind spots going in. So we may go in with a plan for the design. We may go in with a plan with a brief. But when we are dealing with complex projects and complex constituencies, fundamentally, because we live in racist, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, ableist worlds, and because we have been trained in those ways in our design disciplines, then we have to know going in that there will always be shadow clients. It doesn't matter if you can see them or if you can't see them yet, they are there, right? So that is, I think, deeply understanding that there is a great unknown in front of you. And what you want to do is learn how to encounter that unknown will be huge for your practice. Obviously, having the diverse team, because think about every member of your team, diverse in terms of their discipline, working with interdisciplinary teams, diverse in terms of their work and life experience, diverse in terms of their social positioning and experiences. Think of everyone on your team as potential sensors of that funny feeling, right? Start to understand, like being triggered is not a bad thing, relevant to the work. When anyone on your team is triggered, always think, oh my goodness, that's not something to hide from. That's something that we should surface, because behind it, maybe there's a shadow client there. Maybe it's just a trigger and it's a trigger, but maybe behind that trigger is a shadow client. So what the other thing you can do is create an environment in your working team where it is extremely safe to deal with dangerous topics. That's huge, because if you don't have the capacity, if you are scared of conflict, if you don't have the capacity to deal with difficult topics when they come up, to deal with all manner of funny feelings, then you're going to lose the underlying juiciness, the potential in that conversation. You're going to lose that. So what you want to do is, I think, that you can do is really create that environment that is welcoming to your blind spots. So it's not about knowing. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to read every book, but you do have to get a good team, and you as a leader have to create an environment that models and demonstrates that no matter the topics that are coming up and surfacing in the work with your constituents, you are ready to start handling it. And that you will continue to expand your knowledge and expand your team and gain the resources to handle those difficult things. But yes, absolutely. Learning the skills for having difficult conversations, huge in doing participatory work. Absolutely.
Great. Yeah. So diverse teams, and this way, and creating safe spaces, and this way making more opportunity for more sensors of this funny feeling. That's what I'm also remembering, the funny feeling and the sensors for the funny feeling. Yeah, great.
Yes.
Anyone else? Yeah. Yeah, that would, sorry for the, but it will work. If anyone wants to ask a question and really doesn't want to come forward, we'll make it work.
Okay, it's a bit strange.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah.
Both sides. It will work.
Yes.
My name is Wendy. I like your post-anthropocentric beginning with El Popo. So we had this project about co-creation on plants in urban greening project. At some point we were thinking how to give a voice to the plants. So also a question to you, did you already had experiences with plants or non-human beings as your shadow clients? And how would you bring in? Yeah.
Yes, on the team, there were actually 3 architects. And one of the architects specialized in, on the first team, the Coastal team, I worked with 3 architects. And one of the architects specialized in creating habitats, for urban fauna. So, she had designed for bats, she had designed for squirrels, she had designed for a lot of things that live in the urban environment, for a lot of wildlife, urban wildlife. So, creating a voice. I don't know if it's so much of a voice, because I think that is like people have voices and they want to sit at tables. But I think it is developing a relationship with what is non-human, right? Yeah. And understanding when in the process to actually center the non-human. And centering the non-human is also means a change in the practice and a change in the mode of practicing. So centering the non-human may mean that your intervention has to be extremely minimalist, not disturbing, not building. Maybe your intervention in that as a designer when you center the non-human is not constructing a building or a specific habitat, but maybe that I am giving a protocol for working with already existing elements of the environment, or preventing further building, or creating a protocol for new ways of interacting with those plants and surfacing those ways of interacting, right? So yeah, I would step back from this notion of giving a voice to the plants, although plants do communicate depending, there are lots of trees. I come from lands of the big old growth forests. in Washington State, where underneath, you know, we now know that all the trees, the big old growth trees, communicate with each other. They have their own language through the root system. So they don't actually need a voice per se, because they actually talk just fine. I guess the question is listening. And
do you engage in the work of Anna Singh?
No, I have not.
Okay, because she talks about active noticing and deep listening.
So there you go.
Yeah, okay.
Deep listening is really great. Okay. And again, having someone on your team who knows how to listen to plants and then receiving the feedback from that and adjusting the design accordingly, being creative with that adjustment is key. Because I think that it always comes back to what about our practice are we willing to change or to transform, right? What about our practice are we willing to give up? What are the most sacred parts of our practice that we are willing to transform based on new information? And that's really the challenge. And for me, that's what I think is actually the most feminist about practices, is that there is a willingness and that there's an openness to transform. There's a malleability about the practice. So yes, however you listen, and then working with that listening and creating more space for that listening.
Okay, thank you, Elle.
Great, yeah.
You're welcome.
Listening and the relationship.
Thanks, Wendy.
I also heard that very well. There were more questions? You can stay seated because she can already see you. Can you? Or, yeah, I think so.
Can you see me? Hello.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Kat, and I had a question about the last story that you talked about the design firm that needed your advice on their cultural mind shift, let's say, and also about your response to the first question where you said, okay, to solve our blind spots, we should create a safe space as a leader and try to have a diverse team. And of course, I totally agree, but unfortunately, I'm not the leader, let's say, in my company. The company I work at is not that kind of safe space, let's say. So I wonder, first of all, the strategies that you advised to this company, how that they could make this cultural shift, and maybe these are things that I could ask for towards my leaders to be like, let's make our place also more safe.
Okay. Well, and I should be clear, spaces that are safe for conflict. Let me be very, very clear about what I mean by safe spaces, because I am a Black woman who works in a predominantly white and male industry. And, you know, in all of my various incarnations, I've often worked primarily with in a lot of spaces that have been deeply, deeply unsafe for me in every way, right? So when I say safe, I mean safe for conflict, safe for raising concerns. And when I also mean safe, I mean creative, right? Safe in that these are creative environments in which the leadership of those spaces is willing to work in a creative way with those concerns that are raised, rather than just trying to squash and shut down. Now, what do you do when you are not the leader? Well, I have to tell you, and this is very honest, this is what it took me a long time to learn. But you have to believe in your practice enough not to work for leaders that you don't respect. If you don't respect a leader, don't work for them. Figure out something else to do. I don't know, deliver newspapers. Do newspapers even still exist? I don't know, but figure out a new job. Start cleaning, I don't know. OnlyFans is hiring. But do not work anymore for leaders that you don't respect. You're young, it's not gonna kill you. When you don't respect a leader, don't work for them. It took me a long time But my very last resignation letter 5 years ago, I had to admit that where I went wrong is that I submitted my talent to people who don't respect talent. And if you don't respect talent, I can't work for you. That's step one. Everybody has a job, and you have a job to be competent at, and leaders have jobs to be competent. You know, I wouldn't work in a Trump White House. If you think that your leaders are confused dudes, don't work for them. That's step one. It's difficult, but find something else to do with your time or start your own business. The second thing is that if you can open up a conversation, if your leaders are competent, then bring your concerns. If you feel safe, bring your concerns, bring your funny feelings, not at times when it's like high pressure times in the middle of the work, but bring it, you know, in moments that feel appropriate to you, that feel comfortable and calm moments for you, and ask them to investigate making these cultural changes. Bring the argument, present the argument, join with other members of your team. If it's a healthy work environment, you should be able to join with other members of your team and make an argument for investing in this kind of cultural shift. And then number three, they can hire me.
Okay.
You can tell them that you give them my phone number, my contact information. You don't have my phone number, but my
yeah,
contact
actually I might. I mean, they could use it.
Hey, that's how it works. Cultural shift, but no, seriously, cultural shift takes all of us. And just, you know, at every point in your career, at every step of your career, you always have power. You have different powers. Just the leader has a certain set of power, but you have a certain set of power. And sometimes your set of power is to leave the job and do something else and reorient yourself. And that can be the biggest and best thing that you do for your career, because sometimes having that experience, going through that kind of experience will make you in future the kind of leader who can be trusted to do the right thing. That's the other reason why you don't stay a long time with incompetent leaders. You learn bad habits, and that means you have to waste more time unlearning them when you're, you know, in your 50s. You don't want to be doing all that. You want to learn from the best from the beginning. Don't work for losers.
Okay, thank you. That's clear advice.
Thank you so much for that answer, because when Kat posed the question, I wanted to say Kat has been on a few events and is actually quite brave to be so open, I think, about these things happening. But in a lot of more private conversations, I think there are a lot of people who can actually ask exactly the same question as you just did. So thank you for asking the question, and thank you for your great answer, which is also, for a lot of people, probably quite unnerving, but really true. Yeah. You wanted to ask a question? Yeah.
Hi. I have a similar but a bit other.
What's your name? Tell me.
Hi,
your name.
I'm Nele. I recently
Nice.
took over a quite large, for me, architecture firm of 70 people, and it exists for 100 years, so it's quite male and, you know, cis man kind of environment. It used to be, but now things have been evolving. We are specialized in public buildings and health environments, so it's quite a female environment as well, and we have a lot of female architects within us. But I really like to engage in the discussion that you just set aside. Problem is that some of my employees are really not that diverse. So you have the diverse women who like to engage in the opportunities that are given to them, but I have some employees who really like to bash, and I don't.
Who like to bash who? Or what?
Today it was a body shaming
Oh.
thing during lunch, or people who are not really fond of the inclusive thing. It's not a lot of people, but it's some people, but they have a lot of qualities as an architect, and I wonder if I should just fire them.
So this is the question the other way around. Don't work for certain people, but now these people work for me.
It's if you really want to be inclusive, then you have to include all kinds of opinions, also the right ones. And for me as a woman, it's very difficult to do it, and I really wonder if it is just not inclusive for me as well, to not include the right opinion. Like left and right, the extreme, and I don't know how to deal with this.
All right, so now this is going to be, so Neela, you need to listen carefully, Okay, there are some opinions that you cannot include if you value your own health and safety and well-being. I, for example, you know, what did that horrible George Bush said? We don't negotiate with terrorists. I do not negotiate with fascists. I'm not going to have a conversation with someone who questions my humanity. Let me just tell you, there is a limit to what we're going to have a conversation. We don't have to work together if you're a fascist. I showed you only a little bit of my honor agreement at the beginning. My honor agreement has 4 parts. I just focused on the part that's relevant to working with you all today, which was the part about giving proper credits when you learn new ideas. But there are 3 other parts of my honor agreement that I make everyone sign when they deal with me. One of the most important parts is the last part, which says, when working with Dr. Enigbokan, I will not knowingly engage in racist, sexist, heterosexist, ableist, transphobic comments or behavior while we are working together in our meetings or in the design process. If it comes up, someone points it out, I am willing to discuss that and resolve that solution immediately, and to discuss that. That is a condition of working with me, because I realized after my last resignation from working with incompetent leaders that one of the things that I had worked all of my life, I had studied, I've gone to all the school you can go to, I've done all the best things I could do, I've worked as hard as I can. But in all of those times, I have never, as a woman, as a Black woman, I have never put any parameters around my work. I have never given any conditions. I have never even had a minimum working condition. I have endured all kinds of strange things and abuses and weird comments and sexual harassment, and I have never put any conditions. So I said, as I go into my own practice, as part of honoring my practice, honoring 20 years of work, honoring and respecting myself, I will not work with clients that cannot meet basic minimum requirements, then those are not my clients. And, please run free, go do something else. And when I worked with a large architecture firm, I sent out that honor agreement. And there were 2 women and 5 men who on the leadership team who had to, and every individual who sees me has to sign that they agree to that condition. And almost everyone signed it, but there were 2 men who did not want to sign it. They had many excuses. I don't know why I have to sign this. We have company policies. Are you saying that I'm going to be, racist? Or, they were very defensive about it. And, I said, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to sign it, but then you don't see me on this team. We don't work together. I'm perfectly fine working with 5 people on the leadership team. We will still accomplish the work. You don't have to come to my meeting. In fact, you can hear from them afterwards. The meeting can be recorded and you can comment. But what is happening is that in the course of me doing my work, I have minimum requirements And there's a fundamental reason for that. It's not just my feelings. It's that I won't get the best work from the team if that space is not, if I don't take a strong leadership about the kind of space we're running. And as a result of that work together, I got a contact from everyone on the team that this was the best environment that they had ever worked in terms of the feeling of the environment, both from the women and the men, because it was comfortable. So there were many opinions that were expressed that, were, well, we don't really like diversity because then it means that we become less excellent. People expressed all kinds of things. There were, older white Dutch men on there, so you could imagine everything. But the point was that there was not regular disrespect. And as a leader, and as a person guiding the work, if people cannot conform to basic practices of environmentally working together, then they can't work with you. It's just very simple. Make your standards clear. Make the basic minimum working requirements clear and go from there. So the reason I can't work with a fascist is because I'm not going to get my best work. It's not, there's nothing for me to do there. I'm not going to sit and be threatened while I work. It's not happening. So I think we do need to set standards, working standards for ourselves, and then stick by those standards. And as the new leader, that is well within your power to develop what those standards can be, and ask everyone to agree with it and make it someone else's choice. And they can choose if they don't want to work with those standards anymore. But this company is evolving, that's all.
Very nice, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, good luck,
Thank
Neil,
you.
and congratulations. That sounds tough.
Ooh, yeah.
That sounds tough.
That's right. Honor agreement. Oh, I'm totally gonna. We can need this. We can use this sector-wide. I think actually.
Oh,
I
and
see
can
a
I
lot
just
of
say one
nodding
more
here.
thing?
Yeah.
Can I say one more thing, Evelyn? It's a great exercise, even if you don't implement it, because I understand that in your working environments, for example, like CAT, maybe you don't have the power, or you don't do the hiring, you don't make the decision about who you work with. But even sitting down and doing the exercise and saying, what are the 4 minimum requirements that I need to feel good and respected, and it's the minimum requirements that I need to do my best work. When I do my best work, what are the requirements I need? Whatever those can be. It could relate to money, it could relate to respect, it could relate to a lot of things, but just write down your 4 bottom line so that you know when it's time to leave a job, when it's time to ask for something you need. Because you just have to know, everything has, even when you download an app, when you buy something from the IKEA, it says to use this app, you need this much space on your computer. To do this, you need this much space in your home for this bookshelf. You need working requirements. So just know them, have them, do the exercise and know your working requirements.
Great. I'm gonna organize a workshop where we can do this together. I think. Yeah, you're up for that. I have one. I would like to go on actually, but I have a second part, and I also would like to have some time for that. So I have time for one more question, if there is a question, please. Yes, if you would like to come. Here you are. The camera's there.
Hello, my name is Lieve, and I have a question about your participatory process that you did. You said that it's about also including these women, and they have this local knowledge, and so I thought about it like, is it not about giving these women and their situated knowledge that they have around the park an equal position to the expert knowledge of the designer, and are these participatory planning processes also not something like a male environment that we should question in the same way as we question architecture? And then should we also not question the institutions and how they
write out their assignments, like today the participatory planning processes, like assigned by local authorities, don't give the space to include these shadow voices in a way that you describe them. And so is it not time for a new practice for the activist planner and researcher to give a space to these shadow voices in these processes? So that's my question, actually.
Great. Thanks.
Well, Leva, thank you for that question. I think it's a nice one for me to close on. So first part, as I understand it, it's about how to balance expert knowledge and local knowledge, correct? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yes?
She's nodding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So expert knowledge and local knowledge. Look, I don't weigh the, in a large participatory process, I think that we deal with a world in which both expert knowledge and local knowledge are both over and underrated at times. They're not well balanced. So one of the most important things is to understand, first and foremost, what do the different kinds of knowledge give the process, and where in the process is that knowledge relevant. So a lot of times, we don't go to local knowledge until it's too late. Designs are already made in many official participatory processes. The designs have already been decided, and then it's a job of just generating consensus, bringing it and putting it to people, and getting their vote or their opinion. But the reality is that the design would probably be better if the local people or the different kinds of local knowledge or unofficial knowledge had been included earlier in the process before the design was decided. So the first thing about that is that we have to understand where each different kinds of knowledges are valuable. And then we have to plan our design processes accordingly. There are moments where local knowledge is a lot more important. And local knowledge doesn't have to be right. There's nothing about being right. It's about what people know and how they live. It's a very different kind of knowledge. And they don't necessarily need to be compared, but they do need to be integrated and logically within a design process. And that is actually part of the job of the designer in collaboration with the team that you're working with and the stakeholders you're working with. So that's the first part of your question. I wouldn't place an opposition between the two as a designer. You don't want to ever find yourself in, I'm the architect and I know best. And that happens a lot with architects because that's how they're trained. Don't do that. People don't like it. They smell it on you. They sense it, and then they become your enemy. And you don't want to make enemies. So you have to have a very different attitude towards local knowledge, not an oppositional attitude, which one is best. Then the second thing is, when you work in participatory major projects, you have to deal with the history of and ongoing history of inequalities in the processes that you're working with, right? So participatory planning processes are flawed. And I have to be honest with you, I don't particularly believe in participation. What I believe in is creating the best design that you can in the circumstances that you have, and knowing when it's the right job for you to take. And when you decide to take on that job, then you take on also, as your client or as your brief, the mess of that history, the mess of those bad politics or weird politics, and you make a commitment to navigate that whole mess. So I don't think as a designer, you can really afford self-righteousness, being too righteous, because it's not about being right. It's not about being the right person. It's about getting something done with a bunch of people. And your job is to bring the inspiration, to bring the energy, and to bring the to bring people to a place where they can imagine something they couldn't imagine before. And that kind of power can work across a political spectrum in many cases, to a limit. Again, I bring up the fascists because this is what's going on in many places in the world. It's going on in the United States, and you all definitely over there in Europe, you're going through it. The fascists are back. So there is a limit to what you can do in certain environments, but bringing the way of imagining it differently, that is always your job in a participatory process. And you can do that with anyone, including your fellow designers and yourself. I hope that helps a little bit, Liva.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for all of your questions.
Thank you so much for all of your answers.
I hope it's been helpful. Great.
An applause. You can't see everyone, but they're all applauding.
I can see the first two rows.
Yeah,
Yes,
great.
Thank you.
So I told
Thank
you
you
before
all.
we were expecting about 30 people, but there are actually 45 people here.
Awesome.
Yeah, so
Big
just so you
45.
know.
I love this gathering.
Yeah,
Yes,
great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. We're going to say goodbye now because we're going to continue the conversation in the room here with our
Bye-bye
guests here.
from under the volcano.
We know now where to find you, so...
You know exactly where to find me. Just get to the volcano, take a left at the volcano. There I am.
Yeah. That's
I'll
good.
be right there,
Okay.
just, waving.
Stay safe
All right,
with the
see
volcano.
you guys.
Bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Yes, en dan gaan we even over naar het Nederlands. Dat wordt ook ineens een hele switch. Ik wil heel graag onze gasten van het tweede deel naar voren vragen. Caroline Thaler en Ama Koranteng-Kumi. Kom erbij. Ik ga jullie even goed voorstellen ondertussen. Oh, jullie krijgen ook al een applaus. Kom maar zitten. Ama Koranteng-Kumi zit hier naast mij. Zij ontwikkelt en leidt projecten die bijdragen aan een inclusieve samenleving. Je woont en werkt in Antwerpen en in Amsterdam. Je bent medeoprichter van MINO Art Space and Agency, waar we vanavond zijn. Je bent ook oprichter en directeur van Bloei en Groei, een organisatie in Amsterdam, een groen sociaal project, inmiddels vele malen bekroond en het bestaat 10 jaar. En jullie creëren stadstuinen, tuinen die dienen als healing en community gardens om vrouwen te empoweren en ook om bij te dragen aan het creëren van veerkrachtige wijken. En Caroline Thaler is projectleider bij Endeavour. Ze studeerde af als architect en deed daarna een master in Human Settlements. En binnen haar projecten gaat ze steeds op zoek naar mogelijkheden, partnerschappen en methodieken om een breed spectrum van belanghebbende doelgroepen te betrekken. En binnen Endeavour staat ze mede aan het roer van het project The Feminine City, dat onderzoekt hoe de vrouwelijke stad eruit kan zien. Welkom, fijn dat jullie er zijn. Het is even overschakelen nu in een andere taal. Nu we net... Ja, wacht, ik ga jullie een microfoon erbij geven. Er is ook water als je ondertussen wat te drinken nodig hebt. Ja, wat is jullie... is er nog iets wat je specifiek bijbleef? Of iets... Ben je inmiddels totaal verward? Of geïnspireerd? Of,
Ik ben vooral benieuwd wie morgen hun job allemaal gaan opzeggen.
Ja, of in totale verwarring niet meer weten of ze nou werkt. Ja, gaat. Toch nog even overslapen, ja. Caroline, misschien begin ik met jou. Om je iets meer te vragen om te vertellen waar je mee bezig bent. Endeavour bestaat dit jaar 10 jaar en jij werkt er zo'n 2,5 jaar, heb je me verteld. Yes. En jullie zijn natuurlijk heel veel bezig met participatieve trajecten en zoeken daar ook in hoe die vorm te geven. Kun jij met ons een aantal sleutels of lessen leren die jullie inzetten om goede participatieve trajecten vorm te geven en in het bijzonder ook om die shadow clients waar Adeola net met ons over sprak, om die te vinden en te bedienen?
Ja, zeker. Ik denk dat het een beetje corporate is, maar ik ga ook wel Endeavour even voorstellen, gewoon omdat het ook al terugslaande op wat Adeola zei, een groot, hoe dat wij in elkaar zitten, eigenlijk heel belangrijk is voor onze werking. Dus Endeavour is een coöperatieve vennootschap van een 14-tal personen. En wij hebben allemaal ergens een beetje een achtergrond in ruimtelijke of architecturale kennis met hier en daar een uitschieter van een grafisch ontwerper en een onderzoeker. Dat zorgt ervoor dat wij in al de projecten dat wij doen, die eigenlijk zich binnen het ruimtelijke weefsel bevinden, dat wij altijd zowat tussenin alle spelers bevinden. De spelers zijn de mensen die de ruimte gebruiken, de burgers, maar ook verschillende stakeholders, de klanten, Vlaamse steden, gemeenten, overheden, maar ook privéorganisaties en architecten of stedenbouwkundigen. Dus wij zweven er altijd zo wat tussen en wij verstaan iedereen een beetje. Wij werken, als je dan eventjes naar de volgende slide gaat. Ja, wij werken graag impactgedreven en we doen dat eigenlijk op twee verschillende pistes. Enerzijds zetten we heel hard in op die co-creatie. We hebben vandaag participatie gehoord. Wij gebruiken graag het woord co-creatie omdat we verder willen gaan dan het louter informeren. En het meer is dan de hoeveelheid van mensen die we betrekken, maar dat het echt meer kwantitatief ingezet wordt. En anderzijds werken wij ook graag activistisch. Dus wij zetten ook wel wat in op proactieve projecten, zaken die wij zelf interessant vinden, die maken dat wij daardoor onze praktijk ook wat voeden. En inderdaad, de Feminicity is daar één voorbeeld van. Doorheen onze processen proberen wij dus inderdaad op verschillende manieren co-creatie aan te pakken. In eerste instantie denk ik, wat dat heel erg terugslaat op wat Adeola vandaag vertelde, is het proberen naar voren brengen van stemmen die nog niet gehoord worden of die inderdaad niet automatisch in gedachten werden gehouden wanneer dat er een verandering gaat plaatsvinden in de stad of wanneer dat er een studie wordt besteld of iets dergelijks. Het project dat ik daarvoor mee heb genomen is het Ringpark Zuid, dus een grote verandering in Antwerpen, dus van een van de parken die gaat bijkomen. Dat is een heel grote oppervlakte waar heel veel gaat veranderen, waar heel veel expertenstemmen naar voren komen, maar ook heel veel participatie met stakeholders, van buurtregisseurs, buurtbewoners. Dat gebeurt allemaal en toch merkten we dat daar bepaalde stemmen omwille van verschillende redenen niet voldoende naar boven kwamen, die uiteindelijk wel enorm veel impact gingen voelen van dat nieuw park. En ook tegelijkertijd ook dat nieuw park een uitzicht moest geven. Die stem is in dit geval de jeugd. En dan op Kiel is dat dan een groot deel mannelijke jeugd, maar dat gaat ook, daar zijn we zeker ook wel naar de vrouwelijke jeugd gaan kijken. En eigenlijk proberen we door dat inderdaad te identificeren, Adeola noemde het zo dat funny feeling gevoel, proberen we dat aan te pakken en proberen we daar ook aangepaste methodieken voor, of aangepaste methodes voor aan te nemen, eerder dan de infomarkt of de interviews of de vergaderingen die met de normale of de doorsnee stakeholders zouden gebeuren. Dus ik denk dat dat er eentje is die wel zeker en vast belangrijk is om mee te nemen in een participatietraject of een co-creatietraject. Ja.
Dus die andersoortige methodiek.
Die andersoortige methodiek en die andere stemmen naar voren brengen en mee betrekken in het ontwerp of in
Dus luisteren naar die funny feeling. Want is dat iets wat je herkende?
Maar ik denk dat we het nog nooit benoemden als funny feeling. Ik denk dat het ook, ik denk dat het ook niet alleen vanuit onszelf komt. Het is ook door eerst te spreken met de gekende stakeholders en dan door te vragen en te horen of inderdaad binnen het team onderzoek te gaan doen hoe de situatie is. Dat we merken dat eigenlijk de vooropgestelde vraagstelling uitgebreid moet worden en inderdaad aangevuld moet worden met bepaalde stemmen die nog niet naar voren waren gekomen tijdens het vooronderzoek of tijdens de bestekvoorstelling of dergelijke. Ja. Inderdaad. Ik denk misschien ook Sorry.
Nee.
Ja.
Ja, maar door.
Ja, voilà. In tweede instantie denk ik ook dat dan... Want je kan die mensen wel betrekken, of je kan er wel zeker en vast mee aan de slag gaan. Maar een groot besef ligt ook in het feit dat zij van een totaal andere achtergrond komen, omwille van verschillende redenen. En een van de andere achtergronden is dat zij bijvoorbeeld nooit architectuur hebben gestudeerd of stedenbouw hebben gestudeerd en ook misschien daar zelfs nog nooit mee in die zin in aanraking zijn gekomen. Zij maken gebruik van de stad of de ruimte op dagelijkse wijze, maar daar in een veranderingsgerichte manier naar kijken, of die oplossingsgerichte manier waarop dat of waarop dat de opleidingen zo vaak naar kijken, is niet iets dat automatisch bij iedereen ingebed zit. En dus we proberen ook via verschillende conversatietafels en methodieken met elkaar in gesprek te gaan. En dan gaat het niet alleen over wij met die stakeholders of die andere doelgroepen die we betrekken, maar ook met elkaar. En dan een van onze partners mee aan de tafel zijn ook vaak de architecten of de stedenbouwkundigen of de opdrachtgevers, om eigenlijk goed te zien dat er een soort van gemeenschappelijke taal moet gevonden worden. En dat dat ook veel tijd vraagt, omdat dat iets is dat moet groeien van beide kanten. Soms moet iets wat dat helemaal op expertenlevel is uitgedacht, eigenlijk meer richting... Ze noemen het inderdaad, het is niet dat de ene experten zijn en de andere niet experten zijn, maar er moet een vertaalslag in komen. Aan de hand van beelden is vaak heel handig, maar ook aan de hand van ervaring in de stad. Dus gaan wandelen en het bekijken van de plekken zelf. En aanwijzen wat de ervaringen zijn van de gebruikers tegenover wat dat er voorgesteld door architecten, stedenbouwkundigen en het team. Dus ik denk dat dat ook een is die taal en die met elkaar aan tafel zitten en daarover in gesprek gaan, is ook eentje.
En het uitgaan van ervaringen hoor ik je daar ook
bij.
Ja,
inderdaad.
Dat is waar net die vraag eigenlijk ook.
Klopt, ja, inderdaad.
Ja.
Ja.
En dat is ook iets wat jullie bij de Feminine City...
Dat is ook iets wat we bij de Feminine City inderdaad heel veel doen. Dus
als ik je mag vragen.
Ja, ik moet daar ook eventjes over vertellen. Dus de Feminine City is eigenlijk een project dat proactief is begonnen. Dus vandaar dat ik mijn uitleg ben begonnen met het feit dat wij ook proactief werk doen. Dus wij zijn benaderd door SAMO, een organisatie onder andere in Antwerpen, die bezig was met het opzetten ook van een tuin, een gemeenschapstuin, die ons vroeg om aan te sluiten bij dat project, om te zien hoe er meer groene ruimte en publieke ruimte of semi-publieke ruimte kan ingenomen worden door vrouwen. Dat was iets dat wij daarvoor ook al wel eens hier en daar misschien hadden horen vallen, of dat in onze interesse was gekomen, maar tegelijkertijd was er nog geen mogelijkheid gekomen om in de officiële opdrachten daarmee aan de slag te gaan. En dus toen we dat hoorden, zijn we daar direct mee ingestapt. En ondertussen is dat met wat werk ook een soort van officieel project geworden. En daarin gaan we dus inderdaad op zoek naar wat een vrouwelijke stad kan zijn en dan voornamelijk hoe dat we daar geraken. Dus we zijn altijd bezig met het vormen van de stad en het proces daar naartoe en dan zien van hoe kunnen we in de eerste plaats, in dit traject in ieder geval, vrouwelijke stemmen meer betrekken. Wat zijn thema's die meer naar de voorgrond moeten komen? Hoe kunnen we ervoor zorgen dat er safe spaces worden gecreëerd om in bepaalde in welke omstandigheden kunnen zij hun ervaringen meer delen? En op welke manier kunnen wij ervoor zorgen dat dat mee in een officieel heel verwarrend stadsmaakproces ook betrokken wordt.
Ja, dus dan start het vanuit een soort eigen initiatief, of
Yes.
meer dat activisme, maar wel om het terug in te brengen
Inderdaad, in
bij
onze eigen
beleid, wat uiteindelijk weer de opdrachtgever is voor andere
inderdaad.
trajecten.
Ja.
Misschien goed om even naar jou te gaan nu, Ama, want jij komt eigenlijk vanuit een heel andere hoek vanavond meeluisteren, dus ik ben ook heel benieuwd hoe jij misschien op dingen een soort heel andere kijk hebt daarin. Ja. Maar misschien eerst iets meer over het project Bloei en Groei.
Ja.
En misschien ook wel over MINO als je wil. Want ik
Oh,
denk dat er eigenlijk van
ja,
alles
heel
is
fijn.
verteld
Ja.
wat daarbij linkt.
Ja.
Maar Bloei en Groei inderdaad ook een... Caroline zei net ook een tuin. Ik denk dat Bloei en Groei ook een soort voorbeeldproject was voor de partners die in jullie project starten. Maar kan je misschien eerst iets meer vertellen over
Ja,
wat dat project
inderdaad.
is en de aanleiding?
Ja,
Ik heb er ook wel wat beelden van.
Oh, heel mooi.
Daar
Ja.
is zo'n in het.
Dus eigenlijk wat we met Bloei en Groei doen, wij creëren groene ruimtes in de stad. En dan heel erg vanuit het concept of vanuit het idee van social justice. Dus Bloei en Groei is als een grassroots organisatie maar begonnen in de wijk Amsterdam-Zuidoost, ook de Belmen genoemd, voor degenen die Amsterdam een beetje kennen. En we zetten heel erg in op vrouwen-empowerment, op wijkontwikkeling en op community building. We werken daarin op 2 manieren. We hebben dus healing gardens, maar voor vrouwen uit die buurten en die wijken. Zie de healing gardens eigenlijk als tuinen waar je naartoe komt en daar runnen we een aantal maar programma's op. En we hebben ook maar community gardens waarin wij met verschillende stakeholders zoals met woningcorporaties, de gemeente werken en dan heel erg maar gekoppeld aan buurtopgaves. Dus ja, dat is Bloei en Groei.
Dus jullie zijn dan vaak zo'n partner
Ja.
die erbij wordt gehaald
Precies.
en eigenlijk in die processen wordt gezet.
Ja, ja.
Ehm,
En dat is ook heel erg interessant om nu eventjes maar hier te zijn en het verhaal vanuit de andere kant te horen. Klopt.
En wat denk je dan
Goh,
als je dat hoort?
het klinkt
Zijn er dan
zo
zo dingen?
herkenbaar. Wij zijn inderdaad de shadow client, hè, zoals Adeola het zo mooi maar verwoordt. En eigenlijk maar heel erg maar herkenbaar. Echt een veelgevraagde partij in de stad, in Amsterdam, in Nederland ook. Wij zijn landelijk ook de grootste partij op dit gebied. En wat denk ik dan? Ja, het is een heel... om maar heel direct te zijn, ik blijf eigenlijk best wel ver weg van placemaking en van zulke opgaves. Ja, ik vind het een lastige, zeker als partij, ja.
Omdat je dan merkt dat je niet de goede vragen krijgt misschien? Of
Nou,
ligt het aan die partners?
wij hebben deze vragen maar gekregen vooral in de context van placemaking. En vaak gaat het om tijdelijke projecten waarbij groen maar wordt ingezet om de wijken maar te doen bruisen. Jullie kennen maar dat concept ook. En naar mijn idee is dat gewoon niet de manier waarop wij willen bijdragen aan de wijk. Dus ja, en dan zeggen we maar heel vaak nee, want voor ons zit in die placemaking een bepaalde tijdelijkheid. Waar we niet in geloven. Voor ons zit vaak in die placemaking maar projecten ook een gebrek aan die lokale kennis en de lokaal DNA van de wijk. Hè. Het zijn vaak maar architecten of stedenbouwkundigen die worden ingevlogen in de wijk om iets op te zetten. Ook vaak in een wijk die te maken heeft met gentrificatie. En ik denk vanuit een bepaalde principe willen we niet, hoe zeg je dat, maar complicit zijn aan zulke praktijken. En het is best wel een uitdaging, want je hebt ook met mensen te maken en er zijn ook wel heel veel toffe projecten en die vragen ons dan vaak ook maar om te participeren. Maar over de jaren heen kan ik best wel zeggen dat we participatie moest zijn en gewoon heel vaak nee zeggen, klopt.
Want heb je slechte ervaringen dan?
Ja, ik bedoel, dus ik praat nu even vanuit onze context. Dus zoals wij de context in Amsterdam kennen. En zeker de context in de wijken, maar waar we in maar actief zijn. Hè, Amsterdam-West, Amsterdam-Noord, Amsterdam-Zuidoost. Denk aan wijken zoals Kiel, Stuivenberg. Vind ik dat in die placemaking, maar projecten en participatieve maar projecten vaak echt dat stukje ongelijkheid en in ieder geval de blind spots in zitten over die ongelijkheid. En je kan ervoor kiezen om als burgerpartij, want wij zijn deels ook een burgerpartij, om daarin mee te gaan en in dat proces mee te gaan. En wij zeggen heel vaak nee.
En hier bij MINO in de agency zijn jullie ook dan in het culturele kunstenveld bezig met advisering, denk ik.
Ja, inderdaad.
En dan word je dus ook ingevrogen om de kritische stem te zijn.
Inderdaad.
En dan die place for a safe space for conflict. Waar we het,
klopt.
Waar Adeola het over had.
Ja.
Dus als je eens even komt invliegen hier met je kritische blik.
Ja.
Wat is die kritiek ook op die, want je zegt we willen niet complicit zijn, dus we vragen ons nu af van die ongelijkheid.
Ja.
Ik denk dat dat iets terugkomt, we hebben ook wel eerder gesprekken gehad, wat we wel in veel van die participatieve projecten, eigenlijk zit het er vanaf het begin een soort van ingebakken. Hoe kijk je daarna?
Nou, ik bedoel, om gewoon even door te denken over het onderwerp. Het is dus niet dat ik bedoel, de intentie van participatie of de intentie van mijn co-creatie, zoals je dat heel mooi zegt. Maar in principe, daar is niks negatiefs aan. Ik denk dat het vooral voor ons heel erg zit in de, maar hoe geef ik dat aan? In de machtsverhouding, waar wij als organisatie in onze dagelijkse struggle een bepaalde antenne voor hebben. Dus ik denk dat de shadow client juist, en inderdaad, ik vond het ook wel mooi om ergens maar te horen, ook vanuit de feministische theorie heb je ook te maken met de standpoint-theorie en de stem en de blikveld van gemarginaliseerde groepen. Nou, ik durf te beweren dat wij als organisatie en als mensen binnen de organisatie praten en het blikveld hebben van die gemarginaliseerde groepen. En dus er is een bepaalde antenne voor die machtsverhouding. En die machtsverhouding ontstaat al heel snel bij een participatieproces in zulke wijken met zulke stakeholders. Dus je kan er met z'n allen in komen met goede intenties, maar het ontstaat. En dat is oké. It's part of life. Het is in het leven. Maar wij als shadow client, het kost ons ook heel veel energie. Dus wij kiezen er niet voor om daaraan te participeren.
Ja, en het is oké, zeg je, maar het is wel vaak misschien niet echt in zicht bij de spelers die in de machtsposities zitten. Het is een beetje abstract hoe we aan het praten zijn, merk ik. Maar
En om ook maar eventjes gewoon de situatie even om te draaien. Ik bedoel, wij hebben ook dus Bloei en Groei is intussen een professionele organisatie met 20 medewerkers. We bereiken 200-300 bewoners maar per jaar alleen maar in Amsterdam. Dus ook wij zitten in een bepaalde positie waarin ook omdat wij een machtspositie hebben. Hè? Dus ook om het even met de andere kant maar om te draaien. En ook als wij nieuwe tuinen opzetten en als wij met bewoners omgaan, ook wij worden maar geconfronteerd met steeds die kritische mechanismen dat ook eigenlijk voor ons geldt. Van hoe pakken wij dit aan? Dus ik wil het niet alleen maar neerleggen bij de architectuursector of bij de context. Ik denk dat het gewoon in heel veel processen zit. Zeker tussen instituut en bewoners. En ook in de processen die wij in ons dagelijkse werking hebben. Dus daar zit ook voor ons de uitdaging.
Ja, ik denk dat dat wel iets heel herkenbaars is in de architectuursector, dat je al die machtsposities hebt. Zeker, Adeola noemde het ook net van architecten. We worden ook opgeleid om het beter te weten. Dus daar zit ook al iets in van een machtspositie natuurlijk. Maar het doet me ook denken aan en ik kijk even naar jou ook weer, want wij hadden het in een voorgesprek er ook over, een soort van verantwoordelijkheid die je ook wil nemen als je wel in dat commissioned deel, dus als je een opdracht krijgt of een vraag krijgt, dat je kritisch wil zijn op die vraag. Dus ook wat Adeola ons zegt met die shadow client is een manier om die brief te expanding the brief, zei ze, hè? Of redesigning the brief zelfs. Maar ja, hoeveel ruimte krijg je daarvoor? En hoe kijk jij daarnaar als jullie vragen krijgen? Tot waar ga je op een bepaalde manier en tot waar ga je niet? Want je stapt natuurlijk als vanzelf heel vaak in trajecten waar misschien de beginvraag al
fout zit. of alleen nog niet volledig is.
Is dat zo, moet ik misschien eerder vragen?
Ja, ik zou zeggen van wel. Ik denk dat we die zeker en vast vaak in vraag stellen en zo ver mogelijk in vraag stellen. in hoeverre dat we het natuurlijk kunnen, want ook binnen ons team zitten blind spots, ook dat ik u daar vroeg. Ik denk dat we daar zeker en vast nog veel verder in kunnen gaan. Ik denk dat we op 2 manieren het dan toch, of er dan toch mee aan de slag gaan met de eventueel iets uitgebreidere vraagstelling of de iets uitgebreidere opdracht, of misschien ook helemaal niet. Wij proberen, wij worden natuurlijk altijd mee in het proces genomen om met het idee om dit proces co-creatief aan te pakken. Of in ieder geval, de klant weet op voorhand dat er stemmen tevoorschijn gaan komen. Zij zullen nooit van ons antwoorden krijgen. Zij zullen altijd van andere partijen antwoorden krijgen. En dus we proberen altijd van in het begin zoveel mogelijk die stemmen in ieder geval al in kaart te brengen en te zeggen, die moeten mee aan tafel zitten en daar ook manieren voor aan te reiken. En daarvoor, en ik begrijp zeker en vast jullie moeheid, maar daarvoor, omdat wij inderdaad zo van die tijdelijke processen doen, een plein wordt eraan gelegd, dat duurt lang, maar tegelijkertijd duurt dat ook heel kort in de tijd van een buurt. Zo'n proces duurt 1 jaar, 2 jaar. Maken wij op dit moment gebruik van lokale organisaties, initiatieven, betrokken burgers, geëngageerde burgers. Of als die er nog niet zijn, proberen we de zaadjes te vinden en proberen we daar wel nieuwe coalities voor op te richten of samenwerkingsverbanden aan te gaan. Goed wetende dat wij inderdaad altijd terug wegtrekken en dat op een zo goed mogelijke manier achter te laten. En als laatste merken we, en dat is bijvoorbeeld wat er bij de Feminicity is gebeurd, maar dat is ook wat er gebeurd is bij de Skate VZ2 die opgericht is, merken we dat er bepaalde vraagstukken na de opdracht nog blijven zinderen. Zowel bij ons als bij opdrachtgevers, als bij misschien deel van ons ontwerpend team. En dat moedigen we aan. We doen dat zelf, we gaan daar zelf verder mee aan de slag. En ook in onze afsluitende notas of ons eindproduct zullen bijna altijd wel nog aanbevelingen staan voor de toekomst om inderdaad mee die ondersteuning van die sluimerende coalitie mee te onderschrijven of dat ene probleem dat nog niet is aangepakt, maar dat eigenlijk even belangrijk is als de verandering van het plein, om dat toch ook nog mee aan te pakken.
En lukt het dan ook? Want één ding wat ik sterk vond van wat we net gehoord hebben, is dat ze zei, je zou die shadow clients ook moeten laten helpen to determine the deliverables. Dus dat vergt dus als zijnde daadwerkelijk invloed op het proces en op het eindresultaat van het proces. Eigenlijk moet er de openheid bestaan in het proces als je het serieus wil nemen, om die stemmen te horen en een plek te geven in het proces, dat het proces daadwerkelijk omvormd kan worden of een andere kant op kan gaan. Of een andere kant is misschien te ver, maar in ieder geval daadwerkelijk een andere vorm kan krijgen. En dat vraagt, kan ik me voorstellen, natuurlijk van een opdrachtgever, ook die dan, of ja, je shadow client, je real client, zeg je dan, vraagt dat natuurlijk ook een enorme openheid om daar eigenlijk in mee te gaan. Hoe ervaar je dat? Is dat iets wat je kan testen vooraf? Of is dat iets wat jullie ook lukt om daadwerkelijk processen mee vorm te laten geven door de stemmen in het proces?
Dat is afhankelijk van de opdrachtgever tot opdrachtgever. Dat is al gelukt in de zin dat het komt soms inderdaad zover dat het anders gewoon stilvalt. Hè, dat je merkt dat eigenlijk de verwachte uitkomst voor zowel de klant als voor jezelf niet kwalitatief genoeg is, dat eigenlijk geen antwoord op de initieel gestelde vraag geeft. En als het dan mogelijk is om bij de opdrachtgever, dan passen we dat met plezier aan, omdat dat ons ook natuurlijk veel beter resultaat geeft en een veel beter, veel sneller vooruit gaat. Maar goed beseffende dat dus de meeste van onze opdrachtgevers publieke overheden zijn en dat zij ook natuurlijk nog een deel zijn van een systeem waarin dat zij moeten beantwoorden. Eigenlijk zijn zij ook hebben zij ook een klant. Dus daar zit natuurlijk ook een watervalsysteem in dat we hier en daar...
Dus hoeveel impact heb je daadwerkelijk in het systeem? En wat jij zei, Ama, we willen niet complicit zijn. Dat is het andere uiterste, dat je niet in zo'n traject stapt omdat je denkt, dan dragen we eigenlijk bij aan iets waar we misschien helemaal niet achter staan. Of waar we in ieder geval de invloed niet kunnen uitoefenen als we er niet achter staan.
Ja, inderdaad.
Maar ik wilde nog iets anders aan jou vragen, Ama. Een van de dingen die Adeola ook zei was, wat we ook wel weten, maar wat ik mooi vond, dat ze de link echt legde tussen de need for diverse teams, dus de workplace culture, dat we daadwerkelijk ook in de werkcultuur en in de diversiteit van onze praktijk daadwerkelijk heel veel werk hebben in die sector. Ja. En dat heel erg samenhangt ook met de trajecten die we kunnen doen, of die we doen met de resultaten die we doen, omdat die dingen natuurlijk totaal met elkaar verbonden zijn. Ja. Nu geef jij geen adviezen op diversiteit en inclusie in de architectuursector, denk ik. Nee. Misschien moet je daar ook eens ingehuurd worden.
Why not?
Of misschien, maar je doet dat wel in culturele organisaties en zo, als ik het in ieder geval goed heb, zeker, met MINO. Ja. Zijn er daar een aantal lessen uit of dingen die je ons kan meegeven hier, allemaal eager om iets te veranderen? Ja, waar moeten we beginnen?
Ja, maar dus inderdaad, dus voor MINO Agency, nu eigenlijk al veel langer maar dan MINO, dus een 10+ jaar adviseren wij allerlei maar musea en culturele organisaties. En inderdaad, gewoon lessen, dat is een moeilijke, Evelien, aan mij. Om het zo
we
even...
moeten gewoon expertise inhuren.
Ik vond ik vond de handvaten die Adeola al gaf, gewoon een hele belangrijke. Want inderdaad, team en de verschillende inzichten en vormen van diversiteit in je team, echt op het heel spectrum van diversiteit, is een hele belangrijke. En zo cover je al een aantal, of al heel veel maar blinde vlekken. Dus eigenlijk is dat echt een hele sterke. Ik vond het ook een heel sterke maar advies over leiderschap. Want het gaat in de zin van eigenlijk een zero-tolerance beleid ten opzichte van discriminatie, racisme, microaggressions binnen je organisatie. Want dat gaat om inclusief leiderschap. Dus ja, dat waren eigenlijk al echt al twee hele sterke punten vanuit haar. Als ik even de link maak tussen Bloei en Groei, wat wij doen, en hoe wij werken met culturele organisaties zoals Rubenshuis, KMSK, dus best wel vrij grote, maar complexe organisaties, dan komen bij mij 3 woorden naar boven die eigenlijk in onze werkwijze en in mijn visie, dat is heel erg die van equity building. Dus wij zetten eigenlijk heel erg in op hoe kan je middelen, resources, equity maar creëren in dat proces en in wat je aan het doen bent, of het nou als organisatie is of als Bloei en Groei. Ik denk ook een hele belangrijke is dat woord transformatie. Het klinkt heel groot, maar wij willen echt ook in wat wij doen echt een bepaald transformatie maar op gang brengen. Dus echt de change, maar echt een radicale maar verandering. En dan ben ik het derde even kwijt. Ownership, of course, zeggenschap. Want wat je vooral ook heel erg ziet op de werkvloeren als het aankomt op diversity en inclusion is ook, wie zijn de partijen binnen de organisatie die daadwerkelijk dus de ownership of de zeggenschap hebben. En hoe divers, maar zijn die personen maar binnen die organisatie. En zo werken we ook heel erg maar vanuit maar Bloei en Groei, om ook heel erg altijd maar te kijken naar ownership, zeggenschap. Ja, dat vinden we heel. Maar echt zo random tips en zo.
Dit zijn hele goede thema's, lijkt mij. Ik sta even op, want dan kan ik jullie beter zien. Zijn er nog mensen die een vraag hebben of die willen chip in de conversation? Ja, daar. Ik dacht het wel. Helene. Ja, we zijn nog aan het opnemen, dus we doen het wel met microfoon.
Ja, ik heb geen echte vraag, maar ik was gewoon heel erg verrast door Ama haar opmerking over het feit dat participatie, dat jullie daar niet aan meedoen. Want ik zit zelf in een organisatie waar dat hetzelfde op tafel komt. Ik ben als architect getraind en ik ben ook met een hele humanitaire blik naar organisaties gegaan om het goed voor te hebben en om te zeggen we willen de stem van alle mensen gehoord hebben. En dat we eigenlijk merken dat de stemmen die we willen horen, de gemarginaliseerde stemmen, dat dat mensen zijn die geen tijd hebben, die andere dingen te doen hebben, die een gezin moeten runnen, die overuren moeten werken, die 3 jobs moeten combineren. En dat ik mij ook die vraag stel van participatie. Goh, kunnen we dat als architecten misschien niet anders doen? Moeten we niet? En dan denk ik, de presentatie die daarvoor gegeven werd, daar werd ook iets gezegd van, moeten we niet ons gewoon streven naar heel goed ontwerp en onszelf als architecten hereduceren en echt proberen die stemmen te embodyen. Dus dat begint met een goede praktijk, maar dat ik me afvraag, kunnen we niet veel meer bewustzijn proberen creëren in onszelf als architecten om te proberen die noden echt te gaan faciliteren en dat we dat niet als een soort extra laag moeten gaan faciliteren door extra workshops en allemaal leuke formatjes en design workshops. Voilà, dat is een vraag die ik heb.
Mag ik daar misschien de vraag aan toevoegen om die Ama? Zijn jullie als participatiemoe, maar worden jullie niet liever gewoon als volwaardige partners, samenwerkingspartners in projecten gevraagd? Zit daar misschien het verschil? Of zit het er misschien in dat we gewoon aan jullie projecten moeten geven? En niet, ja, want dat is wel iets anders misschien dan de vraag om mee te participeren of samen te werken. Nu vul ik wat in voor jou, maar misschien ligt daar iets met die machtsstructuur.
Ja, goeie. Ik vind het echt een heel, om het wat je ook zegt, ik vind het echt een heel interessant en complex thema. Ik denk dat er verschillende factoren spelen. Eén, dus gewoon als ik kijk vanuit onze positie als organisatie, en zeker vanuit mijn positionality, waar Adeola het zo mooi over sprak, als zwarte vrouw van kleur die een grassroots organisatie opzet en dan echt gewoon heel hard maar moet knokken om er daar uiteindelijk maar te komen. En ook heel erg vanuit in een soort van historical embedding van gemarginaliseerde groepen, wijken, dan heeft het ook deels te maken met emotie. Ik denk dat vertrouwen een heel belangrijk element is als partijen onder elkaar werken. En de emoties zitten hem gewoon heel erg in een structurele achterstelling van bepaalde groepen in onze samenleving. Waardoor er een soort van wantrouwen ontstaat. En dat is heel erg om te zeggen, maar dat is wel zo. Dus ik denk wantrouwen, polarisatie, ik haat dat woord, maar wantrouwen en de emotie van sceptisme, heel erg diep ingeworteld zit in bepaalde sociale processen. Dus dat is één factor. Ik denk dat ook een andere factor is dat vaak zijn deze opgaven vanuit stedenbouwkundige aspect heel erg, hoe zeg je dat? Ja, kapitalistische gedreven opdrachten, want het gaat uiteindelijk over het geld. Wie betaalt, die bepaalt. En achter het kapitalistische opdrachten en de betalende klant van een overheid of van wat dan ook, zit ook een bepaald, hoe zeg je dat? Is er gewoon heel weinig aandacht, zoals ik al zei, voor die machtsstructuren, voor die ongelijkheid, voor die lokale DNA. Dus het begint al bij wijze van spreken al met de offerte. En je moet dus als architect, partij echt heel, heel sterk in je schoenen staan om ook die scherpte te hebben om te kunnen zeggen van wij gaan hier een plein opzetten, maar dit zijn onze randvoorwaarden. Dus, en we merken dat. En het gaat inderdaad, maar uiteindelijk, zoals ik al zei, over equity. Where does the money flow to? Want vaak in die tijdelijkheid van die projecten en in de manier waarop maar die projecten maar worden opgezet, de geld en de middelen en de resources stroomt niet richting de bewoners. die blijven vaak. Dus er wordt een heel mooi plein opgezet, bijvoorbeeld in Amsterdam Zuidoost of hier op Kiel. En jongeren worden bij betrokken, supergoed, super interessant. Maar wat verandert zo'n plein daadwerkelijk aan de situatie van de mensen in de buurten? En ik ga daar misschien wel heel erg ver in. Maar die social justice principles, dat vind ik ook heel belangrijk.
Ja, dat doet me denken aan een discussie die ik een tijdje geleden voerde in Brussel, waar inderdaad een architectenteam een plein waar ze een architectuurprijs voor hebben gewonnen, die ook zeiden, ja, wij moesten daar dan participatie gaan doen en dat wilden we, want we wilden met die bewoners, want het was hun buitenruimte, want het was een grote flat en daar hadden ze geen buitenruimte. Maar ze zeiden, die mensen konden ons eigenlijk niks anders vertellen dan dat gewoon hun kranen lekken, ze toch problemen hadden, ze geen dubbel glas hadden, ze gewoon een heel slechte woonst hadden. Dus ze konden helemaal niet met ons in gesprek over die buitenruimte. En dan krijgen wij hier een architectuurprijs. En ze voelden zich eigenlijk ontzettend ongemakkelijk, want ze zeiden, het echte probleem hebben we dus niet opgelost. Dat is natuurlijk schrijnend, maar dat is wel precies, denk ik, ook waar je nu op wijst.
En dat hoeft niet opgelost te worden, maar door architecten, hè? Dat is niet wat ik beweer, maar daar wringt wel iets.
Ja, maar ik denk dat ik erbij was bij die conversatie. In de zin begrijp ik het, dat natuurlijk... Eigenlijk kan dat project dan niet claimen dat ze het participatief hebben aangepakt en dat ze er inderdaad een prijs voor verdienen. Maar ze zijn wel in gesprek gegaan met de bewoners en hebben die signalen wel gehoord op dat moment. Alleen de stap naar of er iets mee doen is nog niet gebeurd of is niet gebeurd.
Of is niet mogelijk.
Of is niet mogelijk, ja, inderdaad. Ja.
Wil er nog iemand iets toevoegen of iets vragen? Je bent heel welkom. Ja?
Hebben jullie bij Endeavour ooit meegemaakt dat jullie bijvoorbeeld met een bepaalde opdracht begonnen en dat door het onderzoek, zoals je zei, zagen jullie dat het probleem eigenlijk helemaal anders was en dat het opdracht ineens veranderd was naar de oplossing voor de grootste of de belangrijkste probleem dat eigenlijk niet gekend was?
Ja, maar ik kan nu niet direct op een voorbeeld komen.
Collega's wel?
Mijn collega's gaan dat misschien kunnen beantwoorden straks. Of nu. Ja. Dus er zijn hier en daar, en dat is ook wel natuurlijk, dat hangt ook wel echt af van onze vertrouwensband met bepaalde opdrachtgevers. Of gewoon al, soms wordt er ook wel een opdracht zo uitgezet dat er eigenlijk nog ruimte is om dat te kunnen herdenken, van in het begin of zelfs op het einde. Dus ja, maar helaas ben ik het antwoord een beetje verschuldigd. Ja.
Nog iemand? Ja.
Een korte aanvulling op de discussie die Ama aangeeft en die heel pertinent is. Heel de vastgoedsector, waar wij als architecten dienend aan zijn, is georganiseerd op dat goed betalende klanten, eindgebruikers, woningeigenaars, dat die gewoon beter geserviced worden, omdat ze daar meer geld aan verdienen. En de werkelijke grote maatschappelijke nood aan ik vind het woord sociale woning volledig verkeerd, maar bon, we hebben helemaal geen sociale woningen nodig, want er zijn perfect genoeg partijen op de markt die woningen kunnen voorzien voor mensen die minder inkomen hebben, gemiddeld inkomen hebben tegenwoordig. Alleen heeft de vastgoedsector een duwende kracht naar boven om die rijkere klanten te bedienen, omdat ze daar gewoon meer geld aan verdienen. En die duwende kracht, ik heb dat nooit gezien. Ik heb overlaatst een heel interessante lezing daarover gehoord van zo'n vastgoedman. Die duwende kracht, ik weet niet hoe dat ze die maatschappelijk kunnen terugduwen. Ik denk dat dat iets is voor onze regering. Maar die duwende kracht zit in heel de problematiek die je schetst. Er is een push-up.
Ja, Caroline, dat brengt ons misschien ook terug naar dat manifest wat we laatst in de boekenclub hebben gelezen, Feminism for the 99%. Dat we het kapitalisme omver moeten werpen, ja. Zo hebben we vele doelen, groot en klein. Nee, wil iemand voor jullie er serieus op antwoorden, sorry. Nee. Wil er nog iemand een laatste vraag of bijdrage doen? Zeer welkom. Alright, dan gaan we afronden. Nee, iedereen is helemaal vol. Willen jullie nog het laatste woord ergens over? Is er nog iets in het bijzonder wat je bijblijft van vanavond? Of waar je hoofd van tolt, waarvan je denkt, oei, of waarvan je denkt, dit vond ik echt super inspirerend?
Ik denk dat we allemaal nog heel veel aan het leren zijn. Allee, of ik toch?
Nou, dat is ook een mooi als we dat met z'n allen blijven doen. Dat helpt ons ook wel vooruit. Een aantal, we nodigden Adeola uit voor het concept van de shadow client, maar ze gaf ons zomaar nog een aantal andere concepten. Dus iets wat ik zeker ook meeneem is het redefining excellence, wat ik ook erg interessant vond. Die honor agreement. En van jullie ook natuurlijk die machtsstructuur, die equity, participatie, moe. Ja. Ja, nou ja, het is zeer relevant lijkt me. En Caroline, jullie zijn nog ook activiteiten aan het organiseren met de Feminine City?
Ja, maar we hebben nog niks om aan te kondigen.
Oh, er is nu niks om aan te kondigen, maar jullie kunnen het volgen op de Instagram-pagina. Ama, jou kunnen ze volgen via...
Bloei, ja, via heel veel kanalen. Dus
Bloei, Groei
volg zeker
en MINO.
Bloei en Groei. Volg zeker MINO. Welkom. Blijf ook zeker voor een drankje straks.
Nou.
En je weet mij en je weet ons te vinden.
Ja, je hebt vanavond gehoord dat je een heel nieuwe sector kunt gaan aanboren met
Voilà.
MINO, met de architectuur.
Nou,
sector.
druk genoeg, ja. En
dankjewel. Super,
Ja,
dank
blij
jullie
dat
wel.
je
Dank jullie
aandacht
allemaal wel
Ja.
voor jullie aandacht. Fijn dat jullie er waren. Ik moet nog wat aankondigen, voordat ik jullie laat gaan. Kun je nog even naar de volgende slides? Want we hebben nog een paar activiteiten, 2 activiteiten gepland staan met PAF, voordat we een tijdje een beetje rustiger gaan zijn. Dus als je nog wil komen, moet je nu deze keren komen. Want dan gaan we eventjes wat rustiger aan doen. En hopelijk komen we dan in het najaar weer terug. Maar over een paar weken gaan we nog een heel belangrijk gesprek voeren. Want werkelijk in elke avond, en vanavond ook weer, komt de opleiding en de dingen die we leren en moeten onleren en zo aan bod. Dus we gaan een heel fijn gesprek voeren over een paar weken. Bij Stadsforum gaat dat zijn. En we gaan ook nog een online event doen op 6 maart in aanloop naar Internationale Vrouwendag. Dus jullie zijn heel welkom. Kijk op paf.community. En nu, de bar is geopend.